Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, we're going to have a conversation about ethanol. The Small Refinery Exemptions were announced by the Trump administration. We'll talk about that with Monte Shaw of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we have Monte Shaw, the Executive Director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. Monte, always good to have you on the program again. Thanks for joining us, and we are here to talk about not so good news. Last couple times it's been on the better news side. We've had better numbers for the renewable fuel standard, but today we're going to be going over what happened on Friday, which is the release of the Small Refinery Exemptions. That is a battle the folks in the renewable fuels industry have had for many, many years. We just got a new announcement. First off, what's in it? Thanks for joining us, and what's the initial impression?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Happy to talk. Good news, bad news, rain or shine, that's what we do. I would say that, I don't want to be cliche, but I'll use one here, and it's too soon to tell. So, I was actually fairly positive on Friday when the news came out. Maybe that's because I was expecting it to be much, much worse, where we just know right off the bat that this was going to hurt. But really, there were some things to like in Friday's announcement. And then I'll get into it, but there's just, a big question mark. And so,
Right.
until they answer a couple more questions, we're not going to know. The way I've looked at it, there's probably smarter and more sophisticated ways to look at it. But the way I look at it is we're kind of dealing with three sets of actual and future refinery exemptions. And so let's just go through those in order of good and bad, if you want me to.
Absolutely.
So you have all the refinery exemptions that have been sitting out there, some of them dating as far back as 2016 because of different court actions and courts reversing courts and then appeals to higher courts and all this stuff, and all the way up through 2022. And the news there was good. And you might be like, why is it good? They granted a number of them, and so they granted some full refinery exemptions in that time frame. They granted some partial refinery exemptions in that time. But what they did is when they granted them, they said, okay, they get a refinery exemption, an SRE. But what does that mean in practical terms? And what they said was because these are closed compliance years where all the RINs had already had to be turned in, you didn't know you're going to get one. You actually had to comply. So all these refineries turned in the RINs. For those that don't follow this every day, those are the RFS blending credits. They're like the credits that prove that you did what you were supposed to do.
Renewable identification numbers.
Yep, short for renewable identification numbers. And so they turn those in. So what the EPA is going to do is simply give those RINs back. And you'd be like, well, wait, that's billions of RINs back into the marketplace. And while that's true, RINs are only useful for the year in which they were generated and the following year. That's one of the flexibilities into the system to help refiners, but that they don't live forever. So that was one of the things to make sure that the balance, hey, we want some flexibility for refiners, but we do want renewable fuel use over time. So those vintages of RINs, those 2016 to 2022 RINs, are not useful to meet any open obligation right now. So it's kind of like saying, hey, it's your birthday, here's a gift certificate to Dairy Queen for a banana split, but it expired last week.
Right.
So those are off the table. I mean, I'm sure there'll be lawsuits and everything else, but those are off the table. And there was actually precedent for that. Before, heaven forbid, before you think the oil guys got the short end of the stick here, there was another time where the Trump administration in the first term had granted a bunch of SREs that were later kicked out as illegal by the courts. And they said, okay, you guys don't have SREs anymore. So we've made those null and void, but you don't have to give us RINs. It's like, well, wait a minute. Then they functionally had an SRE. So in these, you could say that they functionally, even though they got an SRE, they functionally didn't get an SRE because they turned in a RIN during that time frame. They get that RIN back, but it has no value in the current RIN pool. So that was very positive news for us. We actually encouraged them to do it that way. It kind of, in a weird cosmic sense, it kind of balances out what they had done previously, when they lost their SREs but didn't have to turn in RINs. So I'm sure the refiners who are impacted by that don't view it as well as I do. I'm sure they're very upset by it. But in a way, it kind of made everybody even over the long haul. So that was good. The second bucket, I want to skip 23 through 25, if I might. And I want to skip to 26 going forward. So right now, as you mentioned in your intro, the Trump administration has proposed robust, really good numbers if they finalize them for the 2026 and 2027 RFS blending levels, or RVOs as they're called, renewable volume obligations, for those years. And they said at that time when they released that draft that they were going to do an estimate of SREs for 26 and 27 and build that into the formula. That's what the law says you're supposed to do. Again, on Friday, they said that they were going to be using this new paradigm, this new process of adjudication for SREs that they applied to all the ones they did on Friday to generate that estimate. If they do that, now again, until the rule's final, we don't know. So the 2022s look pretty good. That's the final action. Should be okay there. For 26, 27, and then if this process is followed going forward, I feel confident that we're going to be okay because they've said they're going to do it. They said again on Friday they're going to do it. They actually did it this way in the very last RFS rule that came out of the Trump 1. They actually did do this. So they have a track record of doing it. They've said they're going to do it on 2 different occasions now. So until the ink's dry, don't go to the bank. But I feel like they're on a glide path to where they're going to handle those reasonably going forward. So then that leaves us 23, 24, and 25. The 25s aren't even adjudicated yet because they have to wait till later in this year to do that. But I'm assuming, again, for me, I'm assuming they're going to handle the 25s however they handle the 23s and 24s. So what did they announce on Friday? They announced that many of those, in fact, a majority of those refinery exemption requests for 2023 and 2024 were either approved or partially approved. So they either got 100% relief or 50% relief. And it added up to about, I'm going to round here, 700 million gallons in each of those years. They then said, we don't know if we're going to reallocate them or not. Like what we're talking about with the 26s and 27s where they can project and do this.
Right.
If they do not reallocate them, then that's 700 million gallons in each of those 2 years and presumably 25 as well. And you'd probably get a few more last minute requests. So you're looking at least 2 billion and probably close to 2.5 billion gallons or 2.5 billion RINs being dumped on the market. That would be devastating. That would obliterate any incentive to blend biodiesel at current levels, renewable diesel, higher blends of ethanol. It would just wipe that out for a couple of years. So that is the big question mark. That is the $2.5 billion question, so to speak. What are they going to do with those? I've heard people say there's absolutely no way they'll reallocate them. I've heard people say there's no way they can't do something because otherwise they know they're going to crater the RIN market. The short version is, of course, we don't know. They said they will put out a proposed rule, maybe even later this week, for comment, and then try to wrap it up. I think they'll try to wrap it up in a big red bow with the final RVO rule as well, hopefully in later October. I hope this doesn't mean that slips time-wise. So what could they do? Your guess is as good as mine. The best case scenario is that they add 2 point whatever billion supplemental RVO or blending requirement to the 26 and 27 rule. Okay. We don't care if they grant SREs as long as they reallocate them. Now, I should pause there to say, I think they granted too many. I really think I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lawsuit questioning whether they actually did show there was this disproportionate economic harm to grant some of these.
It was about 63, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. And so I think that they were very lenient in discovering the disproportionate economic harm happened. Even there's been some court cases which maybe didn't go quite the way I wanted to, but there were still some guidelines in there that I'm not sure that they followed. So, but So I think there should have been a lot less SREs granted to begin with, which means the reallocation problem would be a lot smaller one and therefore easier to fix. But putting that issue aside for a second, just hypothetically wearing a renewable fuels hat, if they reallocate every gallon, every RIN that they excuse through an SRE, then we're held harmless. So I don't care. I think there should be fewer of them and all this. But if they don't reallocate them, then that is absolute demand destruction off of the level set by the renewable fuel standard. So if you take those great 26 and 27 proposed RVO rules, even if those great levels were finalized, and then you dump 2.5 billion new RINs on top of it, it's just like pushing it down 2.5 billion RINs. It's no longer a great RFS rule. It's a huge backslide, and you're going to see plants shut down, and it's going to be not pretty. So we really want to see them do something. Now they could reallocate them all in the short term. They could say, hey, we're not going to reallocate any of them. So that's kind of best case scenario, worst case scenario. And then I've heard a lot of theories, and I could share some with you if you want me to, but I have no idea. I have no hate to admit this, but I really don't have any insight into what EPA is thinking on how to balance what's a perfect scenario for us, but the refiners would not like it. What's a perfect scenario for some of them that would destroy us, and then there are some ideas in the middle. I don't know which way they're leaning.
Maybe we can touch on theories in a moment. I did want to touch on a couple tangents first that I thought of as you were
Sorry,
speaking.
that was kind of long, but those are the three buckets that I'm kind of looking at.
Those are the three big questions of before, just now, and then obviously the last couple of years, which are the limbo ones.
Yeah.
And what I want to remind folks listening is it's not that SREs themselves are things that are bad. They're part of the system. It's when you take these SREs and then you do not reallocate what was subtracted. Just first off to clarify that.
Yeah, because the law does require them to estimate how many SREs they're going to grant when they do the annual RFS rules known as the RVOs. Unfortunately, what Biden did in his RFS rule that covered 23, 24, and 25, the same RINs that are hanging out there, is they estimated zero because they said, listen, it's all passed through. I actually agreed with that part of it. I mean, the cost of the RINs is passed through. You make it up in the higher prices of the petroleum products you sell. A lot of economists from Harvard to even the American Petroleum Institute agrees with us on that. And so they put in there zero. Well, now, because that means so that the estimate of SREs for those 3 years was zero. So that's when it went in the rule. And so now if you actually grant 2.5 billion of these, that just comes right off the top of a RVO level that, quite frankly, was already pretty low compared to what we've seen in the marketplace. So that's why it's easier to handle these for those 26s and 27s going forward. And they found a way to make the 22s and the older ones, in essence, go away in a way that was, quite frankly, fair if you look at the long term of it. But these ones in the middle, those three in the middle, those are going to be tough. And our position will not change. It's every single SRE should be fully reallocated.
And once again, want to cover some of these bases as I get into kind of a juicier part of the point that I'm interested in knowing more about. And that is with RINs, you used the analogy of a coupon. Would you view RINs to be closer to a coupon or closer to a currency that just expires after a certain amount of time?
Sure, but maybe like a currency. I mean, I'm old, so I use the word chit, right? Like at a poker game, you don't have cash on the table. You have, I suppose you call them chips too, or you give someone a chit. Is it CHIT? I don't know. I've never looked at how it's spelled.
It is CHIT.
But it's basically a token that you turn into the EPA to say, hey, I comply. You have a blending obligation, and you can either blend or you can collect these chits from people who blended and had extra ones that they would sell you. So when you but yeah, like you say, so whether you think of it as a currency or like an IOU is not really good, but like a chip in a poker game, it does have an expiration date, and so. That's not a bad way. It's probably more like a currency than a coupon. I was just trying to think of, hey, here you get something, but it's worthless, right?
Yeah.
And so those 2022 and earlier RINs, they'll be given back to the obligated parties, but the obligated parties can't do anything with them. It's probably like, Brazilian currency from the 80s. You just use it as wallpaper because it's worthless during their hyperinflation days. So they can't use them to comply for their 23. Or excuse me, their 23 is closed. They can't use it for their 24 or 25 compliance or anything going forward. And so it's kind of like maybe another way of describing it would be a moral victory, right? When we got the SREs that were given illegally during the first Trump administration reversed by a court, but they didn't have to turn any RINs in. Yeah, we won, but it was a moral victory. It didn't help us in the marketplace. They now got these old requests granted. They won, but it doesn't help them in the marketplace.
I think that's a really interesting way to kind of segue into the reason why I'm asking about SREs and RINs in particular. And maybe this delves kind of into some of the theories that you have. But when you are dealing with this raising of the RFS, but then you have to deal with potentially a pushback of the RIN allocations, which is a big part of the RFS, how some refiners are not able to do the required amounts of renewable obligations. They do not have the facilities to do it. So they essentially purchase it from other facilities to do that.
You're being nice. I'd be harsher on them and say they've chosen not to.
They've chosen not to.
They've had 20 years to, and many of them, all you have to do is take a position in a blending terminal and be the blender of record. It's not hard to do. They've chosen not to do it and to fight this out. They don't have to go out and build things.
Right.
They just have to take a position in any terminal around the country.
And if they did, then we wouldn't need to have RINs at all because they all would be able to blend the amount that they need to blend. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there'd still be some that blend more and might want to sell it to people who blend less. But I mean, the point is, any business, any obligated party could have taken steps to become a blender of record by now. Would it change? Would they have to change their business model a little bit? Sure, but that's why they were given these opportunities to do that. I actually think that these SREs were intended to be limited in nature. Unfortunately, Congress, and in fact, I heard a lot. I'm one of the few guys that was around in 2005 when this passed, and I think it was actually an oversight by Congress not to set a deadline by which they no longer could be granted. And the law doesn't, so that's why we're still having this debate. But it was really like, hey, some of these small guys are going to have to make some changes. They're going to have to do some things to get in line with this new law, this new renewable fuel standard law in 2005, 20 years ago. And so we want to give them, they're not these big, powerful, large, wealthy companies. So we want to give them more time to basically make adjustments. And here we are 20 years later, and some of them are still saying that they can't make the necessary adjustments.
Right. And so when you have the RINs, when you have the SREs, shouldn't it be a part of, it feels to me like this was designed to put pressure on refiners from other refiners in the fact that they would say essentially, hey, stop making us pay for you not adding this into your system or not complying the way you need to. And now we have to use our side, or we have to spread out the RINs among the industry in order to do that.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, you have the obligated parties that don't get the exemptions, and then under reallocation, the total number, so let's just use the conventional number. You got conventional, advanced, total. So like a lot of people know the conventional number, so I'll just use that. 15 billion gallons. Well, if these people over here get exempted and you still have to blend 15 billion gallons, then the people who aren't exempted have to blend more than they would have had the other people been doing it. And so, API agrees with us that you can't really justify granting these SREs because there isn't disproportionate economic harm from the program because the cost of the RINs is actually passed through in those refined products that they make. But then they disagree with us. I'm not speaking for them, but I think I'm being accurate here in trying to paraphrase their position. Is they are not supporters of reallocation for the reasons you just pointed out. I really do think if we took a strict look at disproportionate harm and looked at you have these things where like, oh, wait a minute, I only recovered 99% of my in any business, you're going to be up or down on any day, but the way they're looking at it is if they find any little thing, then okay, they're saying that's disproportionate. I think little changes are not disproportionate. It's called business. It's called the daily variety of, hey, we're up, corn's up 20 cents today, it's down 30 cents tomorrow, it's back up 10 cents the next day. Just because on one day you were down doesn't mean on average you weren't, pretty close to where everything else was. So I wish there were a lot fewer of these. I think legally and economically, from all of the experts, there should be a lot fewer of these. I'm proud. IRFA, I think, might have actually been the very first entity that pointed out to the EPA way back in like 2012 or something, that the cost of these RINs is passed through. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we have to go buy, let's just say, we have to go buy $100 million worth of RINs because we don't blend. We produce renewable fuels, but we don't have a blending facility, and we did not take a position in someone else's blending facility, like a Magellan facility or a Kinder Morgan or whatever your pipeline terminals are. Okay, so they say, oh look, so we're harmed because we have to pay this $100 million. But the facts are, is those refined products are worth, it goes right into the pricing formula. They're worth $100 million more. And when the prices of RINs go up, the price of the petroleum products goes up. When the price of RINs come down, the price of the petroleum products come down. It's just passed through. We were actually one of the first, I think maybe the first, maybe there's somebody beat us, but we were tracking this phenomenon at the Des Moines terminal and supported this and sent this in one of the comment periods. And then EPA did an analysis and rolled out a white paper that kind of said, hey, look at this. And then everybody from the American Petroleum Institute to, is it Mr. Stork or Stock? Anyway, he's some world famous economist at Harvard, said, yeah, if you look at this, it's more or less passed through. So I wish they would have gone down that road, because then you have a lot easier of an issue to deal with. And, I'm not trying to be mean to the obligated parties that are getting these SREs, but you've had 20 years to get your business in line. And I don't cry too many crocodile tears very often for the large, well-off oil companies. But, yeah, they end up having to pick up the slack. And maybe that made sense for a handful of years. But I really think that a stricter matrix needs to be used in determining these SREs. In fact, in the statement we put out Friday, I didn't mean to undermine. I think I used the word quibble, and maybe someone mistook that. But I was just trying to point out, well, we could argue about how many SREs you granted, right? My point there was, we do disagree that all of these people had, justification for it. But so long as you reallocate them, then at least we're held harmless. Obviously the people, the obligated parties that would still be obligated and face a higher obligation wouldn't like that. And I'm sure they have people that will make that case as strong as they can. But my job is to make sure that, the renewable fuels industry shouldn't be the industry that's penalized because the 23 to 25 RFS rule predicted zero refinery exemptions, right?
Right, because it should be something where potentially you're spreading it out in the fact that, if all the oil companies, all the refiners had to deal with a couple of years of, we're taking up the slack that everyone else is doing, then maybe there might be some discount on RINs for some of those locations,
and
or ways to just say, like, hey, stop going for this when you're not even you're not even investing in that type of idea already.
Yeah, and so I think you have two battles on hand. One is, what do we do? So, we have a plan for the old RINs that we like. Yeah, we have, and that seems to be settled, so that's really good. We have a plan for anything in the future, starting with 26, that is workable for us. Again, the obligated parties that don't get SREs aren't going to like that, but at least there's a way in there to make the RFS numbers be predictable, and they are what they, 15 is 15, right? It's not 15 minus some future number of SREs. And then you've got these 3 years. Now the problem is that's a lot of RINs, that's a lot of gallons. It's awfully painful to dump that on any one party at any one year. So some of the ideas I've heard are to spread that out. I don't know if you kind of mentioned that. Do you want me to talk about that a little bit, or?
Feel free to. I was gonna kind of wrap up the program with a couple of your biggest theories, what you think might
Okay.
happen, and then we can catch up next time and follow up. Did those seem to come true?
Yeah, and I want to be clear here. I have not had a board meeting since this came out. We're going to have one soon. So these are not IRFA endorsed opinions or
Monte Shaw
theories.
exclusive.
Yeah, and or I'm not even saying I endorse it, but you know, some of your listeners may laugh when I say that I am actually a reasonable person. I like I would say, hey, you just want to add, okay, they haven't adjudicated the 25s yet, so okay, we're just going to take the 23s and 24s. It was whatever that number was. I'm just going to round it to 1.4 billion RINs. All right, just issue a supplemental RVO for 2026 that says on top of the 2026 numbers, you have to and don't lower those by 1.4,
Right.
right? You
I
have
can
to
see
do
them
another
doing
one.
that too. Yeah.
There's 1.4 billion RINs that are going to be back in the marketplace, and so the supplemental will take them back out, and they should have, because had you done the 23 to 25 rule, think about this. Like, oh no, you can't put that added burden. Whoa, whoa, whoa. If you had followed this around, if you had followed this policy of granting SREs year after year after year, then when you finalize the 23 to 25 rule, those 1.4 billion RINs would have been accounted for in that rule. And instead they accounted for zero. So if you did that supplemental 1.4 billion RVO obligation, that it just balances everything out. 1.4 back in the marketplace, 1.4 out of the marketplace the way it should have been. The RVOs are held harmless. There's going to be some winners and losers based on who has the RINs and who needs the RINs, but renewable fuels will be held. But I get that, like, dumping that in 1 year is tough. So I have heard some people. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how, if the courts would say, hey, this is a reasonable. I mean, given the fact this was tied up in court for so long, I
Yeah.
think EPA has some discretion here that I think courts would recognize based on what I've seen in the past. I'm not a lawyer. But do you take it and say, okay, these RINs are going to have a longer lifespan than that 2-year limit? We're just going to do that for it's the way to get the RFS back on track. But you can't just have those RINs out there overhanging the marketplace, or otherwise it's just you go from destroying the market really bad in 1 or 2 years to destroying the market in a bad way for more years. But what you do is you couple some length of a longer RIN lifetime for these limited set of RINs from 23, 24, and eventually 25 with an offsetting RVO. But instead of it being an obligation, blending obligation, right? So instead of it being 1.4 billion gallons in 1 year, maybe it's 1.4 billion gallons divided over 5 years, and you make those RINs last 5 years, and so the market can function a little bit. I'm interested to have those conversations. I'm interested to hear what my board members will say about that when I meet with them next week. But I hope the EPA is being creative in this. I hope they don't just say, "Hey, you guys are screwed. We're giving the RINs, but no more obligation." Well, I don't care if they do it in 1 year. I can see why there would be pressure not to. So, I'd love to have those conversations and try to find a win-win. But to me, a win-win is something that evens the playing field, both on the RINs coming back in and the obligations that should have been there from the 23 to 25 rule being put back in. And that way they balance each other out. That honestly doesn't hurt refiners from what it should have been had this system been running perfectly the last 5 to 10 years, and it doesn't hurt us, and then it also wouldn't hurt us. I'm sure the refiners would rather just see the RINs dumped on the market and no more obligation, and we but it's something I hope the EPA will find a creative solution to.
Monte Shaw is the executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, joining me on Farm Here Daily. Thank you so much, Monte, for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, anytime. Thank you.
This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.